Um, here's some more depictions, and here we can see pairs of breasts from within a Neolithic tomb, and again this figure, very stylized figure on the left, with what appears to be maybe a beak. So there's a question of whether she's related to sort of later carrion bird goddesses like the Valkyries, or the Irish Morrigan, who's a raven, or owl goddesses. And the owl is a very potent image associated with goddesses like Athene in Greek tradition. Here, more French examples, and again the one on the right that we've seen before. Now, there are examples from Neolithic Switzerland of possibly a shrine by, I think it's Lake Neuchâtel, or is it Lake Geneva? Anyway, it's at Ludwigshafen Seehelder, it's on one of the lakes in Switzerland. And here a shrine was found beside the lake, so that there was organic preservation of some of the building materials, and this included this sanctuary, and the sanctuary was decorated with female figurines, and these look to be combining stellar and sort of vegetal symbols in what are quite stylistic female images. You have these what look to be fairly realistic shaped breasts, but stippled with stars, formed from plaster and placed on the walls of this sanctuary. And here they are in their context, and you can see that they're part of strangely symmetrical and regular images. I think I've got a better picture next. Yeah, here we can see them. There's growing trees between them, so they're very stylized, and there seems to be hints of the rising and setting of the sun at the top in the head. So they seem like almost like textiles or carpets rather than people. And if it wasn't for the earlier images from Cucuteni culture, where you see sort of crosses and triangle shapes and circles associated with females, you would perhaps be forgiven for thinking that these were female at all. But then you see the breasts, and it gives you an idea of what the origin of such symbols could be. But this is Switzerland, so by the time these traditions reach Britain, we can see they're already on the way to becoming these female forms are losing any sort of resemblance they had to human figures, and they are becoming a set of symbols rather than recognizable female portraits. And I think this is why a lot of this imagery has been lost or ignored in the past, so that you read a lot about Neolithic art in Britain, and it's all about circles and lozenges and zigzags, and it can't really explain what these patterns are. But if we start to trace this female imagery from the Near East, we get a better idea of what perhaps is being represented. And now another set of symbols associated with death and possibly with goddesses are these schist plaques from Iberia. These tend to be found associated with dead. they're not big. They're very portable, and they could have been worn as necklaces. Some have a hole at the top, so they could have been carried around as talismans. And these kind of blur the line between holy symbolic images and female images and images of birds. These are amazing things, and there's some good papers have been written on these. So there are a number of different types, and people have tried to categorize them and to suggest an origin. Because there are a number of different types, they've tried to trace kind of family relationships of development in the same way that people have done for later Bronze Age beakers, which, the shapes change over time and the designs. But although you have different regional concentrations, there doesn't seem to be any provable development suggesting anything other than everyone borrowing from everyone else because they like the way that their schist plaques looks. So we have the main ornamentation are bars and triangles and zigzags. Some look very animal-like or anthropomorphic, but other ones, like this one, if this had been the only one we'd found, you wouldn't necessarily say that it was a human figure or an animal figure at all. You would say it's perhaps a mountain or a depiction of some textile or a house or something. It's only because we have other ones to compare it with that we can say that actually this is just a very stylized example. As you know, obviously, the one on the top left, if you gave that to someone as a Christmas present, they would think it was a kind of folk art owl with kind of big owl eyes and a beak, and then you have the kind of eyebrows. And so scholars have taken time trying to separate these into different styles and to explain what they might be, whether certain bits of straps or tattoos or dresses or hair or what have you, or necklaces. On this image here, we have that sort of triangular head. It makes it look like a one-eyed womble in this case. And here we have, again, different forms of images. But again, what we're seeing is the triangle and the zigzag and the kind of W shape, which I will associate in later lectures, maybe at the end of this one, with breasts. So you have the eyes and the zigzag of the breasts. See the one at the top bottom right, that sort of definitely has that kind of look to it. And again, the top right, the W, the V's seem to be suggestive of breast, and underneath that you seem to have actually it's arms hanging down. Looking at that now. And we see this same sort of patterns appearing all the way from the Near East with these M-shaped patterns found on so-called eye idols from the Near East. And there is a possibility of trade contact between Iberia and Syria bringing this kind of symbolism, the symbolism of the eye and what I would say were the breasts. And we see the same in Iberian art on the middle and the right. And also in going as far northwest as we're going to go in Orkney, Neolithic Orkney. We're talking 2,500 BC. We have figurines from here with similar patterns. The one on the left seems to have some sort of zigzag on the chest, that the head is missing. And the one on the right, which I think is from Papa Westray, we have the breasts, and then we have the eyes with the zigzag over that, suggestive of eyebrows. Or is it bucrania? Is it horns? Or is it breasts? Or is it all three? And there's a colour image of that last slide. These are from Papa Westray. These are eyebrow motifs from a tomb there. And again, are these suggestive of, are these eyes, or are they bucrania? Or are they breasts? Or is there a combination of all three in the one image, and that's what gives it its power? Either way, it seems to be a continuity of imagery from the Near East, in Iberia, all the way to prehistoric Orkney, that allows us to look at such images in context and as something suggestive of female symbolism. Now, perhaps the best example of this kind of symbolic art are the Fulton drums. Now, the Fulton drums were found in Fulton in Yorkshire, in a child's grave, and they're not big. They're kind of sort of this size, but they are drums of chalk. When I say drum, I don't mean a musical drum. I mean a drum shape. They're solid, and we don't know what the purpose of them was, but they are inscribed with these symbolic patterns, which are suggestive of faces or sexual imagery or female imagery or bucrania, or a mixture of the two. So the image at the top, that sort of seagull shape, is very reminiscent of the shape of the horns of the goddess, but also suggestive of breasts, and also perhaps more suggestive of eyes and eyebrows. And then underneath you have the lozenge shape, which it seems to be a mouth. But on the lower image, you see the lozenge changed to one side, where it's very much a vulva shape, and there the eyebrow on top is more curved and seems to be a bucrania, seems to be the horns of the cow. So the two images are seen as equivalents: the eyebrow and eye, the bucrania, the mouth, and the womb. And remember what we said in the last lecture about the cow goddess Nut, the Milky Way, who takes in the sun through her mouth and then gives birth from her womb the next morning on the horizon, but all from the Milky Way. So there is an equivalence of sort of an entry point, an exit point, and I think the symbolism of the Milky Way is important in this. I probably won't talk about it in what's left of this lecture, but I will mention it in the next one. And there's the third of the Fulton drums at the bottom. And again, this is more like the first one we saw. It looks, you would say it's more of a face than a body, but you know, it's the interpretation is up to the viewer, perhaps. And again, if we look at the top one, we see, if I can, we see the lozenge, female shape, and then the W of what I'd say is a breast shape. Now, that lozenge shape, as I mentioned, is probably the most prevalent image on artwork throughout the Neolithic world associated with the female, with the goddess. So here we have seen it on a number of female figurines as associated with the womb. And it also appears on ceramics from the Cucuteni culture, that very female image. We also find it in the Vinča culture, which again is another Balkan culture just to the south of the Cucuteni lands, and it continues in the Germanic linear band ceramic cultures from about 4,500 BC. So here in this image, we're looking at sort of a 2,000-year gap, and a tradition that is taking us from the Balkans along the valley of the Danube into sort of Germany, Austria, and through France. So we're seeing that this culture, that this image is being borne by the Neolithic cultures as they are spread, and that this tends to be a female image of regeneration. And here's more quite early examples, actually, of this female image. I'll be talking, I think, next week on how this ties in with astronomy. But this is inscription or carving from the Ness of Brodgar in Orkney, showing the same pattern. Now, there's some people that say that the pattern is just a naturally occurring pattern, that if you take certain drugs, or if you starve yourself and go into an altered state of consciousness, you will see these patterns as part of what they call entoptic phenomena. Now, there is a case for that, but there is such a preponderance of the lozenge and the W zigzag shape, and the two combined like this, to suggest that it's more than just random phosphenes and effects of the brain. The piece on the left is a piece of grooveware pottery from, I think that one's from Orkney, and the image on the right is of a carved stone from the chamber tomb, the passage grave of Barclodia de Gaures, the apronful of the giantess, on Anglesey. And it's normally just seen as an inscribed stone or piece of Neolithic art, but the appearance of the lozenge on it suggests, and the zigzags above, suggest to me that we are looking at the same kind of female imagery associated with tombs and with death that we have seen in the graves all the way from Châtelheuc through the Marne region of France into Iberia. So I would argue this is a goddess image. And again, the lozenge, as found in the Bronze Age bush barrow near Stonehenge, and it associates in the Falkland drums. And there's a good image of a scan of the Fulton drums. They're definitely worth going to the British Museum and looking at them. They're one of the best exhibits in there, and probably the least visited. So my argument would be that this stone in the passage of Bar Clodiad Gawredd is a female image. Now it's damaged, so you can see what I've done here is to reconstruct the very top of it, where you've got that pale eye, the pink eye on the left-hand side. The stone there is damaged, and I would suggest that originally there was another spiral mirroring the one on the right. Everything else on the stone mirrors, so why not that? And that it is very similar symbolically to the Iberian schist plaques, which are slightly earlier by 500 years or so. So I think we're looking at the same tradition, and that we are looking at anthropomorphic imagery. There are also other depictions of similar faces or female forms. The middle one is from Bryn Celli Ddu, I think, but the other two are from Bryn Celli. Also a passage grave on Anglesey. And as I some of you will know, as I've probably mentioned before, I believe that the importance of those symbols, the zigzag and the lozenge, relate to their appearance in the Milky Way. Now, what suggests this? I won't go into it in too much detail because we're running out of time, and it's something I'll talk about next time. But the W of Cassiopeia and the lozenge of the constellation of Crux are opposite sides of the sky in the Milky Way. And as we've seen, the goddess associated with the Milky Way is prevalent in Indo-European and Near Eastern myth. Not only that, where this figure appears in Bar Clodiad Gawredd, the chamber itself aligns on the rising and setting point of these stars, joining so that the Milky Way joins them through the passage across the heavens. And sitting there overlooking this is this figure where this red stone is on the map here. So there is that connection to the goddess of the Milky Way, who is also associated with the river, with the Nile in Egypt, and with cows. So 2 hours are nearly up. So I will just flick through these last few. I think I've got about 10 slides to go, so I'll get through this quick. But basically, this lozenge shape, as I've suggested, are the stars of Crux, which are rising to the south in the Milky Way. And just as we have the 4 stars, so we have 4 dots on the belly of the Neolithic goddesses. And we quite often find that those marks on the goddesses have been made by imprinting seeds, cereal grains, into the clay. So there's also a suggestion of the seed in the belly, which is both a farming and a sexual metaphor. So why was this constellation associated with rebirth and the sun and the womb of the goddess? Well, I argue that this goes all the way back to Anatolia in 7,500 BC, at the same time as Çatalhöyük, because there, if you looked on the horizon at midwinter, well, any time throughout that year when it was visible, crux would rise at a certain point on the horizon, and this same point on the horizon is where the midwinter sun would rise in this epoch, around 7,500 BC. So it's almost as if those constellations, the constellation of Crux, was a marker for the place where the sun would be reborn. In other words, the sun will be reborn in the place of the womb, the cosmic womb of the sky goddess. And this image of the overarching goddess of the sky seems to be continued in at least Bronze Age Northern Europe. Here we see examples of it from Denmark in a bronze figure on the left, and from a Swedish rock carving on the right. These are both dating from sort of 1500 BC. Very similar to the figure of Nut. And of course, Nut is associated with the sun, with swallowing and giving birth to the sun. And it's possible that these figures, these dancing figures in Denmark, did the same. Now, one of the figures, the one earlier, the bronze one, the Danish figure is wearing a cord skirt, and we found an individual from Egtved in Denmark buried in one of these skirts, which was probably a sort of priestess's garb for this sun dance. And she was found with a disc, circular disc on her belly. Now, other females have been found buried with these, such as the one on the right, which is in the form of a wheel. And these wheels are also depicted on Bronze Age art associated with ships, with ships carrying them over the sky. So these are solar symbols. So it's a solar wheel that this dancing goddess bears on her belly. So when she's doing that somersault with the sun on her belly, she's doing exactly the same thing as the goddess Nut is doing when she's in the form of the Milky Way with the sun going through her. And here's more images of these dancing goddesses. Here you can see the short skirt of the girl on the right bent over, and you can see her in the sky where the sun would be in the depiction of the ship in the middle, and again the solar ships shown on the left. And here we have that same solar image being swallowed and given birth in a coffin lid, and that's the goddess Nut being depicted. And remember that image I showed you at the beginning of the goddess from Çatalhöyük? What do we see at the center? We see the circular symbol of the sun, and again above her those lozenge shapes. It's the same image in Denmark, 1500 BC, as we find at Çatalhöyük, 7000 BC. And I've shown you this slide before, the horns of consecration. And we see that this image of the double hills from which the sun arises, whether they be the horns of the goddess, the breasts, the open legs of the goddess, is something found in Near Eastern art. We see that at the top in a cylinder seal, and also on the figure 17 here on the left, Marduk on the twin mountain. He's arising from the mountain of the goddess, and Marduk means solar calf of the sun. So he is the bull of the sun, rising from out of the female mountains. And there on the right, we see the same image, Egyptian art. And it's something that we find in the henges. When we look certain prehistoric sites in Britain, look at the rising and setting points of the sun. They seem to be connected to double hills. Where there are no double hills actually in nature, such as here in the Llanberis Pass, as seen from Bryn Celli, where these don't exist in nature, then the banks of the henges themselves form that double hill, that female image. So the henge itself may be the ultimate female symbol, and that is something that we will perhaps look at again next time. So, in summary, this is the spread of the Neolithic female imagery from Çatalhöyük all the way to sort of the Fulton drums. So I would argue that this does show the spread of an important divinity who, if it's not evidence of a matriarchy, as Gimbutas has argued, if that's going too far, it is at least perhaps more symbol evidence of a female equivalent in this creative act. So a culture that honors a goddess as well as a god. But I wouldn't be surprised, given the sort of Minoan imagery and the prevalence of this goddess of death and rebirth, that her status has very much been forgotten over time and perhaps repressed and misaligned in recent years. So it's time that we reinvestigate these images and argue that they may in fact be evidence of this ancient goddess.